Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Webcomics Confidential. I'm Brad Geiger, and last episode we talked about the quote-unquote webcomics bubble, and a lot of that focused on social media. And as I said, there was so much there that I really wanted to come back and talk about some of the issues and drill down a little bit deeper. Today we're going to talk about a new strategy, a revised strategy for social media, because the more that I do this, the more I'm convinced that social media for right now is really where the game is being played. So I want to talk about kind of a revision of social media strategy that's been discussed here on webcomics.com in the past, and maybe see if we can't up our game a little bit in social media. First of all, like I said in the previous episode, social media now is where your game is at. It's not about driving traffic to your site. That was a very formidable goal when you were running an ad-supported site. If you're like most of us, ad revenue has dried up for you. There is no longer the imperative to drive traffic to your site. It's still important to have a site. I'm still sticking with that. I still want a place on the web that I can control completely. And that's where I can do sales. That's where I can do promotion. That's where I can obviously have my archive and control how the archive is presented. I like that feeling of control I get with my own website. This is not a call to abandon your website. Far from it. The website is still an integral part of what you're doing. However, this is to say, more to the point, that your social media now is a standalone part of what we're doing as webcomics publishers. Think about it this way. The old system of doing webcomics publishing, your site was the hub of a wheel that spun around. And you might have a number of spokes in that wheel: Twitter, Facebook, MySpace, if you want to go back far enough. But all of those pointed inwards to the main hub. This new way of doing things, it's a much more spread out, interspersed. You don't have everything pointing into a hub. Instead, you've got different columns, different pillars that are holding up one unit at the top. And each of those units can be a standalone thing. But they also take a team approach as a group. They bolster up this thing that you're trying to do up here. Each one of those columns stand alone, but they each play a part as a greater unit. Does that make sense? We're no longer running a hub. We're running a number of columns. And the number of columns is determined by, for starters, the number of social media platforms that you are actively pursuing, and also other things like Patreon, Kickstarter, crowdfunding, book distribution, stuff like that. So let's talk about that. What does that mean? Well, and by the way, I've seen a number of you start to do this, and in the same way that when you decide that you want to maybe buy a new car, and you decide you want to get a certain make and model, all of a sudden you see all those cars on the freeway, and you start noticing them more. I've been really hyper-focused on how people are doing this, and it's, to a certain extent, driving me a little bit crazy, because I see some old school, some OG web cartoonists who are still doing it this other way of driving traffic to the site, and it's making me a little bit crazy. It's some of you webcomics.com members I've seen out in Twitter and Facebook approaching this in a way that starts to take some steps towards what I was talking about in the previous episode. I'm really excited to see that, and I really want in the months to come I want to hear your responses on how you thought that that was working out. I really feel strongly about this, but like anything else, I wish I could tell you that this was gospel truth and that I can guarantee that 2 and 2 equals 4. There are so many variables that are going to come into play here that it's going to play out a little bit different for each one of us as we go through this. And some of us may find that certain things work, and some of us may find that certain things just don't work out as well for them. So I want to hear your response. But let's, again, drill down a little bit further on social media. So, what should our social media approach be? Well, like I said in the previous episode, it's no longer about using social media to drive traffic to your site. Instead, you should be stocking your social media feed with things that are standalone on that social media network. In other words, I talked about building a rack card, a greeting card display that people could take and share on their own sites to prove how clever they were. In other words, think of your Twitter feed or your Facebook wall as a block of memes that people can grab and share. That's obviously going to favor gag cartoonists and favor people who are doing like a comic strip, something that has a standalone quality. You long form people, people who are doing long form, people who are pursuing that, we've got on webcomics.com, we've got a completely different strategy. You can be still using social media. It's just going to be, you're going to have much different results, and you've got to build that into your framework that we've discussed at depth on webcomics.com. But in the interim, let's think about social media specifically as a standalone thing. In other words, and there's a certain frame of thought that says that putting links and stuff like that into your post, particularly on Facebook, may dampen the distribution. So I'm not even that concerned about getting a link to my site in that post any longer. And by the way, if you're going to take this approach, be sure that you supplement it by making sure that it's easy to find the link to your site on your main Facebook page or on your Twitter profile, stuff like that. It's not saying that you can get away with not linking. You just have to supplement it and make sure that that link is prominent elsewhere. I can't tell you how many times I've become interested in somebody's comic on Facebook particularly, clicked over to their page because I wanted to see more of that comic. I wanted to learn more about this person and was completely unable to find on their Facebook page a link to their comic. It drives me crazy. It happens often enough that that I can officially call it a pet peeve. You need to make sure that there is a link somewhere on that Facebook profile, somewhere on that Twitter profile. You cannot completely abandon that. But putting it on your individual posts, for me, in my opinion, not as important anymore. If you're going to use hashtags, for crying out loud, use hashtags in a wise manner. In other words, so many times I see hashtags that completely don't make any sense, or they're kind of cutesy. Hashtags are there to help people discover you. That means that you need to use hashtags that people might actually use. If it's too specific, or if it involves a pun, or if it's long, or any number of these things, it's not going to produce adequate results. And if it's too general, it's not going to be very useful because you're going to get lost in a sea of people. If your hashtag is hashtag comics, don't even waste the characters on that. That's going to have such a negligible effect on your post. In fact, it could have a negative effect on your post. But in terms of people actually using that hashtag to find your comic, please. I would go with topics. I would go with concepts. I would go with underlying parts of the comic, themes, stuff like that, that would help people to find your comic. But using super general hashtags, I don't see the quality in. And using hashtags that are either hyper-specific or involve a word or series of words that would be very unlikely for someone to do a hashtag search on is equally stupid. If you don't have a good grasp on this, if you can't think of a hashtag, if one is not coming to mind, then don't do it. Don't waste that. Number one, we all agree hashtags look junky. Number two, if you don't understand the why behind you're doing it, don't do it. That's cargo cult mentality. Look up the episode. It's so much of what we're talking about here on social media that people are doing wrong is because of cargo cult mentality. If you haven't taken the time to understand the why behind what you're doing, then it's best not to do it. All right? This cargo cult mentality of doing hashtags because everybody does hashtags, take the time to learn why those certain hashtags may be effective. That way you can avoid just going through the motions and doing this stuff that may be dampening the effect of your post. So put that post out there. Do not put a cropped image and point it back to your site. That's old thinking. That was important when we were doing an ad site. The only exception to that is if you're doing exclusive Patreon content, then obviously you're going to want to crop something and try to get something there. But your bigger goal, if you're aiming towards Patreon, is to build that social media following with as much public displays as you possibly can, and then through community building, build up that person that wants to make the transition and also see your exclusive content. In that respect, it's very much like how web cartoonists used to approach print publishing, right? We put out a lot of stuff in public, and then we monetized on the back end of people who wanted to buy a book. That's going to be your approach on social media for those of you doing exclusive Patreon content. All right? You're going to be putting out a lot of public content. Try to build that up as much as you can, build your reach, so then when you do make the odd Patreon announcement here and there, it's going to go out to a greater range of people, and you'll have a lot bigger pool and a more invested crowd to pull from. So the only time I want to see a cropped image out of you guys is when you're linking to exclusive Patreon content. Other than that, I should be able to, on any one of your social media accounts, click on that image and see the full comic for me to read. Now, that comes to our next point. In the best case scenario, and this may not always be possible, in the best case scenario, I want to see that comic in such a way that I don't even have to click on it to read it. And that involves being very savvy on how you're formatting these images. Now, you can do a Google search on social media image formats and come up with the top 4 returns, I think, on that are all very good, and they're updated quite often. So I don't even bother putting it on webcomics.com because these are all, it's so easy to find and it's updated. I'm not going to, try to be responsible for updating it every time when there are very, very conscientious people doing this already. Go out there. I've linked to one in the comments or in the body of this podcast that I think is really good. In fact, it's got a bunch of Photoshop templates that I think are pretty useful. But on Twitter, all right, Twitter, if you're going to post an image on Twitter, it's going to display at about 506 pixels by 253. Always, always, always in image dimensions, we go width by height. Always width first, height second. I believe the top, according to this site at least, the top image pixels you can have, it displays at 1024 by 512, so that should be your upper limits. And you can experiment with putting a little higher resolution file in there too, as long as you don't top out at their image size in terms of megabytes. I forget what the exact number is, but as long as you don't top out on that dimension of file size, then you're fine. But you can optimize right around 1024 by 512. That's going to be your pixel dimension. If you want to pop it in there at 300 dpi, as long as you don't top out the file size, go ahead. It's just going to look that much better on high Retina displays. And after all, you're not going to be paying for the delivery of this. You're not going to be hit with a bandwidth fee. So shoot the moon as far as resolution goes. I really don't care. Okay, but Twitter, that's going to display, it's going to get crunched down, they're going to crop it for you, you're not going to have any control over that crop, and it's going to be about 506 by 253, topping out when you click on it, it expands 1024 by 512 or so. That's your optimum areas to try to hit, okay? I want to be able to read the entire thing in Twitter without clicking on it, and that means a number of things. That means, number one, you should be using some of these templates. You should be shooting for some of these sizes for sure. But number two, it means that you might want to rethink the actual physical formatting of your comic. I'll give you a great example. It just popped up in my social media feed as I was preparing to do this episode. Somebody I follow, he does a comic strip, and consecutively he did two examples from his archive. And he does a very standard 4-panel strip, and it's always, the panels are equal sized. It's always, you can cut it right in the middle. It's tailor-made for what I'm going to talk about next. In one of the posts, he took the first 2 panels, put it on top, and took the second 2 panels, put it on bottom, and made it a square reading comic. I was able to read that in my social media. I didn't have to click on it. I responded to it much more quickly. I got more out of that comic. In the very next post, he posted it as a strip. It was too small to read. Twitter was going to crop it funny and give me like the middle 2 panels or something like that. And I was entertained by the first one because I read it. I might have been entertained. I might have really liked that second one, but who's got time for that, right? I looked at it, I couldn't read it, lost my interest like that, and I was gone. That's the attention span. And by the way, I'm not proud of that, but I'm honest about it. Looked at it, I was gone. That's what you're dealing with on social media. If you can't grab them at a glance, you've lost the game. That's why if you're doing a 4-panel comic, it is absolutely worth your time to see if you can reconfigure that into a 2 on top, 2 on bottom type of framework so that it's more likely, or even if it's cropped a little bit, you've got enough there that you've got the chance of grabbing somebody. But this whole idea of the 4-panel long horizontal, those things play horribly on social media. You absolutely want to reformat that and try to make it into a square. Without a doubt, you want to be doing that. On Facebook, you've got a lot better image area to work with. Facebook, according to this site that I've linked to, 1200 pixels by 630. I've got very little problems getting a good display on Facebook. And again, Facebook may crop it. There's any number of things that may happen, but you want to make sure that image is, and by the way, use these image guides as a trial and error, or as a kind of general framework, but trial and error is going to be where you excel. Make these posts, put them on Facebook, see how they look, see how other people's posts look, and learn. This is part of your responsibility. Again, don't cargo cult this. Don't go out and say, well, here are the numbers I've got to hit, blah, blah, blah. Look at how your post is displaying. Look at how people react to it. Look at how other people are posting things. Learn from that. Learn the why behind why you're doing this. Again, there's so much cargo cult mentality going on, so much doing it because somebody else is doing it. Take the time to learn why, and you're going to get a lot further than you would have otherwise. Okay? So pay attention. See how your comic displays. See how people are responding to it. I think you'll do a lot better. And finally, in conclusion, taking out this whole idea of driving people to your site, replacing it with publishing on social media. This is now your publishing software. Think of it as your new publishing software. Instead of envisioning that hub, envisioning it as a number of columns. So you've got your website, that's one column. You've got Twitter, that's an independent column. That's a publishing platform of its own. All right? It's not built to lead people over here, although it can do that, and in some cases should, but it's also a standalone thing. Okay? Now that you've got that framework situated in your mind, go back to those 3 C's of social media. That's what you should be doing every day. This is a monster that needs to be fed every day. And it comes back to frequent, significant, and consistent. Your social media strategy, along with publishing directly to that social media platform, should include your 3 C's. Content, that's your publishing that we've been talking about for this entire episode. That's right in there. Number 1 thing. Number 2 C is commercial. That's visit my Patreon, here's a Kickstarter, the book's up, here's an ebook, blah, 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 blah. That's commercial. You spread that throughout. And the 3rd C is curation, sharing things that you think are noteworthy. You should be I guarantee you, unless you are truly, truly grasping social media at a higher level, you should be doing more curation. I feel safe in saying that I can tell you without knowing who you are that you should be doing more curation, because we're horrible at this. We're so fixated on promoting self-promotion, and coming up with our original thoughts, because that's what we do. We're creative people. We neglect curation. That means promoting somebody else. That means, hey, this comic is awesome. That means sharing things that aren't necessarily comic related. Things that you would feel comfortable sharing at a dinner conversation, right? Do you necessarily want to talk politics and religion at a dinner table? Maybe not. Maybe yes. That's your decision to make. You can live with those consequences. All I'm saying is be a polite conversationalist, and I think you're going to go really, really far. Okay? So that means sharing things that you feel are worth being shared. Those 3 C's are going to be something you should be concentrating every day on social media. And when paired with this new re-envisioning of what social media is, not a hub, but instead its own column in your building of your business, I think you're going to be using social media a lot smarter. Now, what are you out there promoting on social media? I see a lot of people every now and again begging for votes on stuff like topwebcomics.com. It's not about driving traffic to your site. I've posted about these sites in the past, and I got to tell you, I still don't get it. I really don't get. I'm trying to find a way to say this that's not going to sound like a put down, but if you're using social media wisely, I don't see the need for those other gimmicky things that I cannot believe have actual worth in your business. My advice, my opinion is to not waste your time with that. And if you do, don't go out to social media with it. That's not a usable. That's not a maintainable. That's an instant unfollow for me. Do not. That's none of the 3 C's. Okay, be smart about what you're doing out there. Okay, but try to build up that organic reach. That's going to make the difference when you pivot and bring out that Kickstarter or make that Patreon pitch. Then you're going to be talking to people who are already listening, who are ready to hear you, and hopefully have been interested enough that they're willing to take that next step and get their wallets out. That's what it's all about now. Crowdfunding is where it's at. And that means at some point pivoting to the money pitch. And we'll be talking a lot more about that, I'm sure, in the months to come. In the meantime, hit those comments. Tell me what you think. Tell me what your thoughts are. Tell me how you might be applying this in your social media. And maybe you've got a twist on it I haven't thought about. And I'm always anxious to hear that kind of stuff. I love to hear how people are taking these concepts and running with them with their own creativity. That's what it's all about. That's why webcomics, I think, is one of the most exciting things, because we've got people doing business here with some of the most creative minds that you can find, and the stuff that they come up with is always amazing. So that's my thoughts. Hit the comments. This is Brad Geiger, Webcomics Confidential, and we'll talk to you next time.